mission. He simply opened a sealed folder, read the final page one last time, and signed a decree that transformed Princess Anne's position inside the monarchy. By the time the pen left the paper, Charles had given his sister powers no royal woman in modern memory had ever held, and almost no one inside the palace had known it was coming. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles kept one hand beside the document in his study at Buckingham Palace. The Crown Continuity Decree, an emergency order designed to preserve royal control during illness, constitutional crisis, or family division, named and guardian of the crown. That office made her responsible for protecting continuity when the monarchy faced confusion or competing instructions. Trust had been placed in his sister, and doubt had fallen across everyone else. The king paused before the final stroke. Camilla would see the decision as a wound. William could read it as a warning about his readiness. Yet Charles signed because a royal emergency leaves no room for blurred authority, and he had seen how quickly private loyalty could interfere with public duty. Only 4 people witnessed the moment: his private secretary, the keeper of the Privy Seal, who safeguards the official seal used to authorize major state documents, and a senior constitutional advisor beside the desk. And felt the weight before she understood it. At Gatcombe Park, she broke the seal, read the opening paragraph twice, and gripped the edge of her desk without speaking. The decree gave her access to succession briefings, emergency government communications, senior household records, and private assessments of every working royal's readiness. These were not ceremonial. They were the hidden tools used to keep the crown functioning when the sovereign could not act normally. Then the most dangerous clause appeared. During a royal emergency, Anne's judgment would outrank every family member except the sovereign and the direct heir. That placed her above Camilla in matters of constitutional continuity and gave her authority no queen consort expected to surrender. She reached for the telephone but stopped when she noticed the final notation. Another royal household had already received notice. Behind a different closed door, the message was read in stunned silence. A chair shifted. A hand lowered the page. Someone realized Charles had not merely rewarded his sister, he had quietly redrawn the balance of power. The signature may have belonged to Charles, but the first emotional shockwave was about to strike every person whose power had just been quietly reduced. A royal decree is never only about the person being elevated, it is also about everyone forced to step aside. For Anne, the appointment carried duty rather than triumph. For Charles, it was an admission that trust inside the family had become dangerously fragile. But for Camilla and William, the document raised a more painful question. Why had the king placed his sister between the crown and the people already standing closest to it, and remained alone with the decree resting open before her? A royal decree is a formal order issued under the sovereign's authority carrying far more weight than an ordinary family decision. She understood that the title guardian of the crown was not a prize. It was a responsibility built from crisis, doubt, and the possibility that the monarchy could one day face confusion at its highest level. Her decades of discipline had prepared her for duty, but not for the emotional cost of accepting it. Charles knew exactly why he had chosen her. They had grown up inside the same cold structure of expectation, where affection was often hidden beneath schedules, ceremonies, and obligation. The brother and sister had learned early that private pain could never be allowed to disturb public service, and had carried that lesson for decades, completing relentless engagements without demanding applause, while the king had watched her loyalty remain steady through every family storm. Camilla felt the decision differently at Clarence House. She removed her glasses after reading the summary and asked her private secretary why no one had consulted her before her ceremonial precedence was limited. Ceremonial precedence means the formal order in which members of the royal family are ranked during official duties. The queen consort understood that and had not taken her marriage or title, yet she could not ignore what had changed. During a crisis, another woman's judgment could now carry greater institutional weight. William read the restricted clauses with growing unease. The future king discovered that his aunt could review emergency plans connected to his eventual reign, including contingency preparations previously reserved for the sovereign and direct heir. He did not question Anne's loyalty, but he questioned what the decision said about Charles's confidence in him. The prince had spent his life preparing for the crown, and now his readiness could be examined by someone outside his household. Then one private clause sharpened the danger, and could give Charles an independent assessment of whether any senior royal was placing personal ambition above the monarchy's stability. She could challenge Camilla, question William, and warn the king without seeking permission from either household. William initially blamed his father's health concerns. Then he reached the final confidential reference and stopped. 2 words appeared beside the reason for the decree: Balmoral failure. To understand why Charles trusted and with such extraordinary authority, the family would have to return to the private meeting everyone had agreed never to discuss. The decree did not begin in a lawyer's office. It began at Balmoral during a private emergency exercise that was supposed to reassure the king that his family could remain united during a constitutional crisis. Instead, one closed door, one missing chair, and one decision made without Charles's approval exposed a struggle for influence so serious that the monarch began secretly preparing and for powers no one knew she would receive. Charles had ordered the crown continuity exercise after a brief health scare left him thinking about the one possibility no sovereign wants to face. The exercise was a confidential test of how the monarchy would function if the king became temporarily unable to perform his duties. William, Camilla, and senior advisors and constitutional officials were summoned because each would have a role in keeping government communication, royal authority, and public stability from collapsing into confusion, and arrived expecting discipline. Instead, she found her chair missing from the main briefing room and her security file placed on a side table outside the closed door. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there reading the message hidden inside the arrangement. Someone had decided her presence was no longer necessary. After decades of service, the humiliation was quiet, but it cut deeply. Charles noticed the absence almost immediately. He looked toward the empty space and asked why his sister had not joined them. Camilla answered with controlled calm, saying Anne's involvement might confuse the line of authority. The Queen Consort believed too many powerful voices could weaken the emergency chain of command, but the explanation left the king silent. Outside, his sister heard enough to understand that she had been deliberately excluded. William shifted uneasily as the final briefing began. The future king knew and was a counselor of state, a senior royal who can carry out certain official duties when the sovereign is unavailable. Excluding her was not merely a social insult. It created a dangerous gap in the very system they were supposed to test, and the prince could feel the room tightening around that truth. Charles found Anne later that evening alone in the library. She told him she would accept whatever decision he believed necessary. Yet her restraint made the moment more painful. Then she gave him the warning that changed everything. A real crisis was the worst possible time to confuse personal rank with constitutional responsibility. The king heard no bitterness in her voice, only duty, and that made the betrayal harder to ignore. Charles left Balmoral carrying her words like a verdict. Before any decree could be drafted, he knew he had to confront the person who had ordered that chair removed. The removed chair had seemed like a small insult, but when Charles finally demanded an explanation, it became the symbol of a far deeper battle over who truly controlled the crown. There were no aides, no secretaries, and no carefully prepared statements when Charles confronted Camilla, only the king, the woman beside him, and the knowledge that one of them had made a decision affecting the monarchy without the other's consent. What began as a question about Anne's missing chair became a painful argument about loyalty, authority, and whether Camilla had started treating her influence as power the crown itself had never granted her. Charles placed the Balmoral seating plan between them and tapped the line where his sister's name had been crossed out in handwritten ink. Clarence House had hosted countless private conversations, but this one carried a different danger. A chain of command is the clear order showing who makes decisions during an emergency, and the king wanted to know why that order had been changed without his approval. Camilla held his gaze and said the exercise needed simplicity, the monarch, the heir, and the queen consort, not several competing voices. The question came without softness. Had she ordered Anne's exclusion? Camilla admitted she had approved it, believing she was protecting the exercise from confusion. Charles answered that she had crossed both a constitutional line and a personal one. The queen consort's face tightened. She had expected anger, but not the suggestion that her judgment had endangered the crown. Camilla reminded him of everything she had endured to stand beside him. She spoke of years of hostility, public rejection, and private restraint, insisting that she had defended his reign when others doubted it. Now, she said, he was showing that he trusted his sister more than his wife. Charles did not dismiss her suffering, yet he refused to let pain become authority. Love had brought her close to the throne, but love could not rewrite responsibility. The king then revealed the legal danger, and had been entitled to receive the emergency briefing because her role allowed her to act for the sovereign in certain official circumstances. Excluding her could have created two rival lines of instruction during a genuine crisis. Camilla had seen only hierarchy. Charles had seen the possibility of chaos. Then the conversation changed completely. He told her he had commissioned a secret decree creating an authority no household could alter through preference, rivalry, or ceremonial rank. Camilla went still. The queen consort understood that this was no longer a warning. The decision was already moving beyond their marriage. Charles closed the Balmoral file, but the conflict did not end with that sound. Another judgment still mattered more than hers. William would have to decide whether Anne's new power threatened his future or protected it. Camilla had lost the argument inside one private room, but the decree could not survive unless the future king accepted the authority Charles had placed in Anne's hands. William was not angered because Anne had received responsibility. He was angered because Charles had created a new center of authority without first warning the man expected to inherit the crown. As the prince read the decree, every clause seemed to carry two meanings. Anne was being trusted, but William was being tested. His response would reveal whether he saw his aunt as a threat to his future reign or the one person capable of protecting it. Charles met him at Windsor and handed over the restricted copy himself. He refused to let his secretary soften the message or hide behind prepared language. A restricted copy is a confidential version of a royal document shared only with people directly affected by it, and the king wanted his son to understand every line without interference. William took the pages, sat down, and began reading in silence. The first reassurance came quickly and could not replace the heir, change the succession, or command the sovereign. Her role existed to preserve continuity when personal tension threatened constitutional clarity. Yet the next clause cut deeper. She could review William's emergency preparation, question his plans, and examine whether his household was ready for a sudden transfer of responsibility. William looked up and asked the question Charles had expected. Did his father doubt his readiness to become king? The prince kept his voice controlled, but the hurt was clear. He had spent his entire life preparing for duty, carrying public pressure and private fear, only to discover that his future could now be assessed by someone outside his own circle. Charles answered carefully. The decree was not punishment, it was protection. The king admitted that William's position made honesty difficult because advisors often feared challenging the future monarch. And, however, had nothing to gain from praise and nothing to lose by speaking the truth. That independence, he said, was precisely why her judgment mattered. Then William found the clause that changed the entire conversation. His aunt could request private readiness meetings with him and send sealed recommendations directly to Charles without approval from the heir's household. More unsettling still, her appointment would survive the king's reign unless a future sovereign formally revoked it, and could remain guardian of the crown after William's accession. The prince read that line twice. Charles watched him closely, knowing this was no longer a debate about one emergency plan. It was about trust across two reigns. William finally agreed to meet, and privately. He did not offer approval, but he did not resist. That silence carried its own warning. William had not rejected Anne, but his silence offered no reassurance, and across the royal households, the secret decree was already beginning to change behavior. Secrets inside a palace rarely remain still. They travel through altered schedules, cancelled meetings, locked cabinets, and the sudden expressions of people who have just discovered that the hierarchy around them has changed. Within hours of the decree being circulated, Anne's office received access codes it had never held before. Camilla's advisors lost control of key briefings, and one family dinner became the setting for a silence no one could disguise. Royal staff moved quickly once the revised instructions arrived. Every constitutional emergency paper now had to be copied to Anne's private office, creating an immediate shift across Buckingham Palace. Constitutional emergency papers are the confidential plans used when illness, incapacity, or crisis threatens the normal work of the crown. The order mattered because information was no longer flowing through separate households. It was being pulled into one system under her review. Anne received the first files without celebration. Aides were told that guardian of the crown was not a ceremonial honor, but a working position with authority over crisis preparation, security coordination, and institutional continuity. She understood what that meant. If the monarchy failed during an emergency, the blame would no longer fall only on hidden officials. It would fall directly on her judgment. Camilla felt the change in one sharp moment. She arrived for a scheduled briefing and found a red folder that had previously gone only to her and Charles. This time, Anne's name appeared above hers on the distribution sheet. The queen consort stared at the page, then asked whether the order had been confirmed. Her advisor said it had. She closed the folder slowly, knowing the new hierarchy was no longer private. Charles tried to hold the family together that evening. At dinner, Anne entered quietly and took her usual seat while Camilla avoided looking in her direction. The king spoke about ordinary matters, but every sentence fell into the silence between them. His sister remained composed. His wife remained distant. No one mentioned the decree, yet it controlled the room. Anne's first review deepened the danger. She discovered that several emergency briefings had been delayed, edited, or rerouted through competing royal households. That meant two senior figures could receive different instructions during the same crisis, leaving government officials uncertain about whose orders carried weight. The weakness was not personal, it was structural, and it was serious. Anne refused to accuse Camilla or William. Instead, she ordered a complete audit of the system, a formal examination of how documents had moved and who had altered them. Her calmness made everyone more nervous because no one knew what the records might expose. Then William sent one direct request. He wanted to meet his aunt alone, without advisors, files, or palace officials between them. The institution had begun obeying Anne's new authority, but the monarchy's future depended on whether William could accept the woman behind the title. For the first time since the decree was signed, there were no constitutional advisors explaining clauses, and no courtiers measuring every word. William and Anne sat opposite each other as nephew and aunt, not heir and royal guardian. The tension between them was real, but so was the history they shared. One honest conversation would decide whether Charles's decree divided the family permanently or created the partnership he had risked everything to secure. William had chosen a private room at Windsor and asked that neither household record formal minutes. Formal minutes are the official written account of what is said and decided during a royal meeting, and he wanted none of that weight between them. No secretary waited outside with prepared language. No advisor stood ready to rescue either side. The prince needed to know whether his aunt had accepted the role willingly, and answered without hesitation. She had never requested the position, and had considered refusing it when Charles first sent the decree. She feared the title would make her appear to be competing with the heir. Even though ambition had never driven her service, the royal guardian had spent decades standing behind the crown, and she did not want one document to turn loyalty into rivalry. William finally admitted what had been troubling him. Charles's secrecy had felt like betrayal. The future king had spent his life preparing for responsibility. Yet, his father had created a new safeguard without trusting him enough to explain it first. He feared the role meant the king believed his own son could not protect the monarchy alone, and leaned into the truth rather than avoiding it. No sovereign protects the crown alone, she told him. Every monarch depends on people willing to speak when others remain silent. Strength was not the absence of challenge, it was the ability to hear a difficult warning before crisis made that warning useless. William listened because she offered no comfort built on flattery. Then Anne placed her first sealed recommendation before him. It proposed that every future emergency plan bring the heir, the guardian of the crown, and the sovereign's household into one shared command structure. A shared command structure means all three centers would receive the same information and follow one agreed line of authority. No hidden changes, no competing instructions, no missing chairs. William read the proposal slowly, then took the pen. By signing voluntarily, he accepted her oversight and changed the meaning of the decree. What had looked like mistrust became an alliance between experience and succession. And watched him finish, knowing the family had crossed its most dangerous point. Yet, their private agreement would soon face a far louder test. Britain was about to learn what Charles had done. Behind closed doors, William and Anne had chosen unity. But outside the palace gates, Britain was about to deliver its own judgment. At dawn, the decree stopped being a royal secret and became a national reckoning. Phones rang across government offices. Broadcasters abandoned their planned schedules, and newspaper presses rushed out new front pages carrying Anne's face beneath a title no one had seen before. The palace had expected questions about authority and succession. What it had not expected was the public's deeply emotional response to a woman many believed had served the crown for decades without ever asking for recognition. Buckingham Palace confirmed the crown continuity decree in a carefully controlled statement before the morning bulletins. The document created a formal safeguard for periods of illness, incapacity, or constitutional uncertainty, meaning moments when the normal direction of royal authority could become unclear. Broadcasters stressed that Anne had not replaced William or changed the succession. She had been given responsibility for keeping the monarchy united when confusion threatened to divide it. Camilla watched the first television coverage alone. One commentator described Anne as the person Charles trusted when ceremony had to give way to duty, and the words landed with painful force. The queen consort had spent years defending her place beside the king. Yet the public discussion now made her sound ornamental, while his sister appeared essential. She lowered the volume, but the message had already reached her. Anne faced a different struggle. She arrived at a scheduled engagement, uncomfortable with the attention, refusing to treat the appointment like a victory. Then a veteran stepped forward from the waiting crowd and said, "You never stopped serving, ma'am." The Princess paused, her composure tightened, and for one brief moment, the emotion she had hidden from the family rose close to the surface. Recognition had finally come, but it had arrived through conflict. Outside Windsor Station, a newspaper front page captured the national mood and appeared in uniform beneath the headline, "The King's Final Safeguard." Commuters stopped to read it, and the image spread quickly across broadcasts. The message was simple: Charles had chosen reliability over royal politics, and Britain understood why. Near Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered with handwritten signs thanking and for decades of service. Yet admiration did not silence controversy. Constitutional critics warned that the unprecedented position concentrated influence in an office never debated publicly, while supporters answered that the monarchy needed clear leadership before a crisis, not after one. Charles watched the reaction build and realized silence was no longer enough. Public opinion had strengthened Anne's position, but it had also deepened the wounds inside his family. The king summoned William, Camilla, and his sister for one final meeting. This time, he would explain not only what he had signed, but why he had been willing to risk everything to sign it. Britain had embraced Anne as the monarchy's safeguard, but only Charles could reveal what the decree truly meant for the family he had risked dividing. The decree had shocked the family, challenged a marriage, unsettled an heir, and elevated a princess who had never demanded elevation. Yet Charles had not signed it to reward and/or humiliate anyone else. He signed it because the crown had reached a moment when private loyalties could no longer be allowed to blur public responsibility. In the final family meeting, the king made that truth unmistakable and ended the struggle with a verdict no one could misinterpret. Charles gathered Anne, William, and Camilla at Windsor and placed the original decree on the table between them. No advisor spoke for him. No secretary softened the meaning. Permanent royal policy meant the order would remain part of the monarchy's official system rather than disappear when the family's anger cooled. The king wanted each person to understand that this was no temporary response to one argument. It was a safeguard built to survive future pressure. The monarch explained why the decision mattered. The crown could function only when responsibility was clear, honest advice reached the sovereign, and separate households could not quietly alter emergency preparations. Conflicting instructions during a crisis would not merely embarrass the family. They could leave officials uncertain, weaken public confidence, and place the entire institution at risk. Charles then turned to Anne. He apologized for allowing her exclusion at Balmoral, admitting that the missing chair had exposed a weakness he should have recognized before humiliation forced it into the open. His sister accepted the words without triumph. She had never wanted revenge. She had wanted duty to remain stronger than rank. Camilla received a harder truth. The king told her the decree did not reject their marriage or erase everything she had endured beside him. But love could not create constitutional authority, and protecting one person's position could never come before protecting the crown. The queen consort listened in silence, wounded, but no longer able to deny the boundary. William changed the room with one decision. The prince confirmed that he supported Anne's appointment and revealed their signed agreement, creating a unified emergency structure for his future reign. That structure, one shared system of information and authority, meant the guardian would strengthen the heir rather than compete with him. Camilla finally turned toward Anne and accepted the revised limits. The princess answered calmly, promising she would use the role only when duty required it, and never for personal advantage. The verdict was complete. Charles had chosen service over ambition, truth over comfort, and stability over wounded pride. And left not as a rival queen, but as the trusted guardian of a crown she had protected all her life without asking for reward. There is no further secret to reveal. The decree's meaning is settled. The family's positions are clear. And Anne's lifetime of quiet service has finally become one of the monarchy's strongest protections. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.